The Battle of Winterfell pits the armies of mankind against legions of the undead in a way too dark spectacle of medieval combat. But what would happen if a modern military force was plugged into this scenario? Hello, hey, hi. Welcome back to another episode of Tactical Analysis, the series where we take an iconic battle from cinema, replace one of the belligerents with a modern military force, and then apply contemporary tactics to explore how said force might go about winning said battle. As always, to present this in a coherent sequence, I'll loosely apply the principles of military planning to analyze the enemy force, the friendly force, and terrain before developing a battle plan and running an animated simulation on how this revised scenario might play out. But first, a recap. The Battle of Winterfell occurs in Season 8, Episode 3 of the medieval PTSD simulator Game of Thrones. It sees the zombified forces of the dead launch an attack against a shaky alliance of disparate human factions from the various families and tribes presented throughout the show. The dead are reanimated by the White Walkers, a species of humanoid ice demons created from men thousands of years ago through ancient magic. The undead army outnumbers the forces of mankind, who plan a defensive battle at Winterfell, the ancestral seat of House Stark. Winterfell itself is an ancient fortress located on the island of Westeros, the fictional continent where much of the story is set. As one of the most northern castles, Winterfell lays smack bang in the path of the advancing army of the dead, who, having breached the immense ice wall at the frozen north of the continent, are now marching steadily south to the more populated regions. There's not much nuance to the purpose of these villainous ice mummies, and their ultimate goal is to usher in an endless winter and destroy all life in Westeros. They plan on achieving this by assassinating Bran Stark, the so-called Three-Eyed Raven, a sort of mage-like guardian for the good guys and a spiritual counterbalance to the bad guys' witchcraft. The objective of the human forces is logically to prevent this from happening and destroy the undead army by killing their commander, the Night King. On this point, it's important to note that Bran and the Big Bad are linked telepathically, meaning the Night King knows of his whereabouts at all times, which is what causes the battle to occur at Winterfell, as this is where Bran is located and ultimately used as bait. The battle is decisive from a strategic and narrative sense. Success or failure leads to the doom of humanity, and in terms of storytelling, it unites a group of previously disconnected characters, us as the viewers have been following for 7 prior seasons of television. Winterfell was meant to be a spectacular culminating moment in the franchise, but it's no secret the entire episode was a bit of a fizzer, and the battle was roasted by fans and critics alike for both the pitch-black cinematography and some perplexing battle tactics. Both these criticisms have been done to death on YouTube before, so I won't add to that pile on, but if you're interested in the medieval side of the tactics involved, I highly recommend this video by Invicta, which goes into what's dumb about the battle and how to fix it. Part 1. Enemy Force Analysis. The army of the dead can be broadly broken into one of two types of combatants: White Walkers or Whites. The White Walkers, also known as the Others, are the show's iconic supernatural villains. Tall, gaunt, and with glowing blue eyes, they appear as wrinkly old men, often with long white hair clad in dark clothes and armor. Despite being served up as the objective force for evil in the series, the White Walkers have their own language, are shown to possess intelligence, and even display emotion. They also demonstrate tactical nous and combat prowess, possessing individual martial skills. While their exact numbers are uncertain, it is shown the Night King converts humans into fellow White Walkers through ritual and touch, which he seemingly prefers doing to newborn infants, like those offered up by the unsavory wildling Craster. Whites are the resurrected foot soldiers of the undead army, a product of White Walker necromancy. Essentially mindless zombies, they are incapable of independent thought and are controlled entirely by the will of their masters. Whites are not exclusively human, and the White Walkers are able to resurrect just about any formerly living species to their ranks, but more on this later. Command and control. As the Alpha White Walker, the spiky-skulled Night King is the supreme commander of all the other White Walkers and resurrected Whites. Once a mortal human, the Night King was initially created to be a weapon by the ancient children of the forest, an even older species who were warring with the first men of Westeros at the time. Other White Walkers are shown to act as generals subordinate to the command of the Night King, and although they perform independent tasks, it's implied they are interconnected in a hive mind fashion and all work towards a common goal. Order of battle. The army of the dead is not structured in a conventional manner, with subunits adopting battalions, companies, or platoons, and are instead organized and attack as a single collective horde. In terms of their numbers, the attack on Winterfell sees a cadre of 12 White Walkers leading an army of Whites, some 100,000 strong. Aside from the resurrected humans, they also have 3 undead giants and 1 undead dragon, Viserion, who previously belonged to Daenerys Targaryen and was killed, then reanimated by the Night King. Assets and weapons. If you've been following following this channel for a hot minute, you'll know this will be the first contact against enemy magic users. Exciting, yay. As such, we'll have to evaluate their assets a little differently to ensure we're respecting their combat power. Therefore, I'll break this part into the enchantments of the White Walkers, then the capabilities of the Whites. First, the White Walker powers. The White Walkers are mythical creatures of ice magic, and as such can freeze whatever they touch. Their melee weapons are crafted from ice, taking the form of swords and spears. The extreme cold of said weapons can insta-shatter steel blades of regular weapons. Although they're capable of verbalizing, the Night King and White Walkers communicate telepathically. This skill extends to their legions of Whites, who are commanded without the need for an audible or visual signal. The Night King's link to Bran Stark is an adjacent power, with Bran permanently marked and therefore tracked after being physically touched. While all White Walkers can reanimate corpses by touch, the Night King is able to do so with greater effect and scale, shown resurrecting hundreds of bodies simultaneously. In single combat, the White Walkers are shown deftly dodging and parrying strikes. Like all good villains, they are also capable of easily chucking humans around the room and hurling ice javelins incredible distances. The White Walkers appear with the cold and are able to manipulate the weather to their desired climatic conditions. This occurs during the Battle of Winterfell, when the Night King conjures a blizzard complete with howling winds and snow. Having lived for thousands of years, they are immune to the sands of time and old age, and are near invulnerable to damage, being unkillable by conventional weapons. Next up, the White capabilities. Like the White Walkers, the Whites are near immortal, and their physical appearance is based on their state of decay at the time they were reanimated. Some Whites still appear as near human-like, while others are practically skeletons. The show is a bit selective with this, but the Whites are shown to be superior in strength to humans, easily overpowering Jon Snow back in Season 1, and punching through wooden planks. In later seasons, however, their physicality seems to get a nerf, or it could just be they're up against the plot armor of the main characters. Although barely sentient, the Whites retain melee skills. It's unclear if these are latent talents drawn from memories, or simply shared skills warged from the Night King. Like their strength, their combat proficiency is toned up or down depending on the needs of the story, but in general they are able to wield daggers, swords, and axes in a simple yet savage manner, and in the absence of weapons will happily throw themselves at enemies clawing and biting. As teased before, Whites are not strictly human, and in their ranks are ravens, horses, bears, giants, and a dragon. Some of these feature early in the show, never to be seen again. However, the giants and dragon are present and play a prominent role during the Battle of Winterfell. Mission. In the show, the Undead have little interest in Winterfell as a location and are instead focused on killing Bran Stark. But for this battle, I'll be replacing the wheelchair-bound medieval child with something a little more fitting. The battlefield, reality, augmented, neural, synaptic, telepathic, automated reconnaissance kill switch. A top-secret and highly volatile Skynet-esque weather control AGI superweapon being developed in secret at Winterfell by the British military. Their military mission statement would sound a little bit like: Task Force Undead is to destroy Objective Bran within AO Winterfell no later than H+12 in order to trigger an endless winter and the annihilation of mankind. Center of gravity. The Night King is the most obvious center of gravity of the Undead army. He is the patriarch of his species, ultimate commander of the military, and the only one with the ability to expand his race. He is the source of all their power in the most literal sense, wielding the dark magic needed to grow a fighting force and amplify their offensive capability. Without the Night King, the entire Undead army ceases to exist, and it fights for no other purpose than to accomplish his objectives. Critical capabilities. Both White Walkers and Whites are functionally invincible to even modern weapons. Bullets would presumably do nothing to harm White Walkers, and although Whites sustain physical damage per se, they can still remain a threat even if headshot, delimbed, or decapitated, be it by sword strike or rifle fire. One of the existential challenges of any army is raising and sustaining adequate manpower, particularly during times of conflict while being attrited. The army of the dead faces no such issues, and on the contrary can exponentially grow its force through combat, by resurrecting slain foes into its ranks. History is full of examples of grand war machines and ambitious plans being at the mercy of the weather. D-Day was famously delayed 24 hours due to storms, as was Operation Neptune Spear due to cloud cover. The ability to control the weather would actually be an insanely powerful capability for any military to have, and would allow said military to set the optimum conditions for friendly forces while maximally hindering enemy capabilities, all done on command at a time of one's choosing. The Whites are simple to sustain as a fighting force with no requirement for food, water, training, or sleep. This means they can advance and fight virtually forever without tiring, or needing to establish bases of operations and logistical supply lines. The captured dragon is a tide-turning weapon for the Night King. This dragon is akin to a strategic aviation asset, able to conduct both deep strike and close air support missions, with its lethal spicy breath. Dragonfire itself is hot enough to melt stone, steel, and vaporize human bone, and despite technically being a wight, the undead dragon is shown being resistant to flame damage. Critical vulnerabilities. Although extremely powerful, the Night King is the progenitor of all beings in the undead army, who exist only due to his magic. Like vampires and other similar monsters, killing the Night King therefore means instant death to the White Walkers, human wights, and any creatures under his enchantment. Like all armies that attack as massed hordes, the undead are vulnerable to being channeled by the terrain or obstacles. In these circumstances, the strength of their numbers is diluted, and they are less able to envelop and swarm their enemies. Dragonglass is the kryptonite to the White Walker species. Being stabbed, slashed, or penetrated by dragonglass causes them to explode into shards of ice, meaning they can be essentially one-shot by strikes that would otherwise potentially not even be fatal. Aside from dragonglass, Valyrian steel is the only other material capable of killing White Walkers. The effect is instant and yields the same result as a strike from a dragonglass weapon. The wights, although unkillable by weapons, are extremely vulnerable to fire damage. Their flesh and bones are highly flammable, and even brief exposure to flame is enough to set them ablaze, whereby they continue burning until proper dead. Importantly, burnt corpses are also unable to be reanimated by the ice magic, meaning setting fire to the dead denies the White Walkers valuable reinforcements. The show gets everything a bit muddled with what can harm who, such as showing wights being destroyed by regular weapons, despite explicitly stating the contrary in exposition.
We can destroy them by burning them, and we can destroy them with dragonglass.
And sure, let's say guns are conventional weapons, so White Walkers would be invincible to small arms fire. But what about like a 155? What would happen if an artillery round direct gut shot the Night King? Would he smirk and self-heal around the hole T-1000 style? Or would he remain intact and unharmed, but get folded and sent flying? You see what I mean? This is one of the problems when you attempt to decontextualize rules from the source material. The magic, superpowers, or invincibility of the baddies becomes inconsistent or nonsensical. So to codify these death parameters, here is the new CSRC canon. Wights can be killed by fire, dragonglass, and Valyrian steel, while the White Walkers are only killable by dragonglass or Valyrian steel. Yes, shut up. Part 2. Friendly Force Analysis. Given as Game of Thrones is heavily inspired by medieval England, the most appropriate choice for the replacement defenders is the modern British Army. British Army units have a long and colourful history, and many have these sick names that would sound right at home in the fictional world of Westeros, like the Sutherland Highlanders, Queen's Dragoon Guards, the Black Watch, King's Royal Hussars, and so on. As the Northmen from Winterfell in the show are represented by Yorkshiremen, which to the uninitiated is this iconic Sean Bean accent.
Move, you bastards! You stupid bastard!
Bastard. 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 You fat bastard.
I'm going to select the participating units based primarily on their garrison location being close to Yorkshire, with a few exceptions. With that said, one thing I know about the British Army is they're all fierce rivals. So no matter who I choose, there'll be some geezer in the comments all like,
"There's 11 of our using that absolute chip shot wedge. Bunch of lizards, a lot of them. Should use the second Queen's Cruppershire rifles if you wanted some proper hard lads."
Order of battle. As the undead army can't be mowed down by machine guns and rifles, there's no single battalion that can be neatly plugged into this scenario. Successfully defending Winterfell will require the creation of a bespoke task force equipped with non-standard weapons. 1st Battalion, the Royal Yorkshire Regiment, will form the core of the task force. In reality, a light mechanised unit, they are based at Catterick, North Yorkshire. One Yorks consists of 3 line infantry companies and a support company running heavy weapons and specialist skills. Cavalry will be provided by a squadron from the Royal Lancers, also based at Catterick. Currently an armoured cavalry regiment, the Royal Lancers also have one of the cooler unit badges and mottos going around. Engineers will come in the form of a squadron of combat engineers or sappers from 32 Engineer Regiment, also Catterick based. Artillery will be provided by a battery of guns from the 19th Regiment Royal Artillery. These guys are based in Larkhill in southern England, but I'll circle back to why later. Finally, air support will come from the 3rd Regiment Army Air Corps, based in Wattisham, Suffolk, with enough personnel to man a forward arming and refueling point, and sustain operations for 2x attack helicopters. Command and control. In the real world, these units are drawn from different brigades and don't typically work together. However, for Winterfell, we'll be reorganized reorganized into a new force element built around the infantry battalion, commanded by a lieutenant colonel. A group of units combined in this manner for a specific operation is referred to as a battle group in Commonwealth military language, with the subunit companies rebranded to combat teams when plussed up with their supporting enablers. British battle groups are typically just named after their core unit, but for this video will become the more appropriately titled Battle Group Kingslayer. Assets and weapons. Unlike previous adversaries we've faced on this channel, the army of the undead is almost entirely impervious to small arms fire. Sure, the wights' physical form factor would be damaged by high-velocity projectiles and fragmentation, but they would remain a threat, albeit a slow one, even if severely dismembered. For this reason, we will equip an assortment of fire and incendiary weapons as the primary mechanism in which to kill the wights. And there's a bit to this, so I'll do a deep dive before rattling off the shopping list. Letting flame weapons do the heavy lifting comes with a few complications, the first of which is the UK being a signatory to Protocol 3 of the Conventions on Certain Conventional Weapons, which specifically prohibits the use of incendiary weapons. Yawn. So straight off the bat, we're going to be rustling some jimmies in Geneva. But does it even really count when the enemy is already dead? Anyway, incendiaries are defined by the UN as
any weapon or munition which is primarily designed to set fire to objects or to cause burn injury to persons through the action of flame, heat, or a combination thereof produced by a chemical reaction of a substance delivered to the target.
With the UK being signed onto this convention since 1981 means such weapons are simply not found in a modern unit's arsenal, and that there is no incentive to develop modern versions of things like flamethrowers, which were all the rage and used by the British in World War II. There are some exceptions, such as white phosphorus, which is still commonly used by mortars and artillery, ostensibly for smoke and obscuration versus intentionally targeting enemy troops. With that being said, the ink must not have quite dried on that aforementioned signature by the time of the Falklands War in 1982, as the Brits were slinging Willy Pete grenades at the Argentinians like they were tax deductible. Still confused by the whole white phosphorus thing? Here's 1980s US Army narrator man to explain.
WP, or white phosphorus, is often used against targets which can be destroyed by burning. The white phosphorus round, with a fuse quick or time, causes the contents of the shell to scatter and burn as it comes in contact with the air.
Aside from white phosphorus, another incendiary adjacent class are thermobaric explosives. Thermobaric munitions are basically fuel-air bombs that differ from conventional explosives in that they damage through a higher pressure, higher temperature blast, compared to conventional explosives where the primary mechanism of injury is fragmentation. This makes them excel when used against enclosed spaces or structures, but they can still be devastating in open terrain. Thermobaric weapons are contentious when it comes to humanitarian law, and while the Russians arguably have the most broadly fielded systems, NATO countries also employ thermobarics in various forms such as grenades, rockets, and missiles. Perhaps keen to steer away from the frightening sounding thermobaric label, these weapons are often amusingly rebranded with more innocent sounding names, such as enhanced blast, anti-structure munition, or novel explosives. Regarding their efficacy against the undead, given as they're essentially an uber high temperature, high pressure, high speed fireball, I think it's totally fair to posit that thermobarics would be lethal to the wights, and that even if they're not touched by the heat or fire effect directly, the blast wave and overpressure would obliterate their skeletal form. The final category in our incendiary family are flamethrowers. Although flame-projecting weapons are now largely forbidden due to humanitarian reasons, they were already on the way out due to practical and tactical reasons. They were heavy, had short range, low capacity, tended to indiscriminately barbecue the battlefield, and left their users and surrounding teammates particularly vulnerable to enemy fire. There are exceptions, such as the present-day PLA with their Type 74 flamethrower, but for the most part, man-portable flame-projecting weapons were largely replaced by the aforementioned thermobaric natures, such as the Russian Shmel or American Flash, which offered increased range and safety for the users. Although the wights can be dealt with by these incendiaries, a reminder that we need Valyrian steel or dragon glass to kill the White Walkers. I'll avoid the cheap shot play of conjuring up Valyrian steel bullets, but we are ultimately working within the rules of fantasy, so I will have to integrate this material into the modern weapons in some capacity, or there is simply no way of taking down the Night King. With that in mind, I'll try apply this magical weapon modification sparingly, and also mimic the availability of the show, where Valyrian steel is extremely rare and reserved only for select hero weapons, but dragon glass is comparably easier to come by and can be found in large quantities. On that note, dragon glass fortunately exists in our world as obsidian, a naturally occurring volcanic glass. Obsidian can be crafted into deviously sharp-bladed weapons. However, it's extremely fragile, making it more suited for slicing or stabbing attacks, as opposed to heavy chopping weapons. This brittleness is exceptionally annoying for me, as it's therefore unsuitable as a fragmentation element in explosives, as it would immediately turn into mostly harmless glass dust blast through thermal shock and blast pressure. This rules out the obvious cheese strat of simply making obsidian-based rockets, bombs, mines, and grenades, and means we'll have to get more creative in taking down the Night King. Okay, now that you're up to speed on the materials, let's explore the specific kit. Savvy? Battle group members will still have access to their individual and section weapons, such as the L85A3, DMRs, and the L7A2 GPMG. However, given their invulnerable foe, these are primarily for personal defense and psychological comfort. One exception to this, however, is the L128A1, or the Benelli M4 shotgun. Shotguns can consume a broad variety of ammunition, such as the iconic and thematically apt Dragon's Breath 12-gauge rounds. These dump white-hot magnesium shards out to around 30 meters, burning at a zombie-melting 2,000 degrees. I'll confess I'd forgotten that Dragon's Breath even existed. Fortunately, one of the absolute gigachads in the chat reminded me of this while we were doing one of the planning sessions for this video. Does the British Army issue Dragon's Breath ammo? They do now.
You guys smoke? No. Yeah, you do now. You like that? Smoke them up, Johnny.
The standard bayonet of the British Army, the L3A1 attaches to the muzzle of the SA-80 and adds 7 inches of cold steel to the end of one's rifle in which to stab the enemy. The Brits are rather fond of the old in-out, on-guard treatment, having conducted bayonet charges in both Iraq and Afghanistan as recently as 2011. Before deploying, Battlegroup Kingslayer will need to turn in their old blades and be issued their freshly cast obsidian L3A2 bayonets. Hand-thrown grenades are employed by the infantry, and for killing whites come in thermobaric, thermite, and white phosphorus flavors. While the blast radius is far smaller than mortar bombs or artillery, their compact size means they can be carried and stored in large numbers. As mentioned, flamethrowers are on the United Nations naughty list, so we'll have to go digging through the museums to find some old war stocks. To get an expert take on this, I reached out to Jonathan Ferguson, who you may recognise as the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Firearms Museum in the UK. Jonathan informed me that the No. 2 Mark II Lifeboy was the standard British flamethrower of World War II, before being replaced by the No. 5 Mark I ACPAC. With that lead, I found this old manual for the No. 5, which gives the maximum range of 50 yards or 45 meters and a firing time of 10 seconds. The in-show Scorpions were fearsome air defense weapons, so the Brits will employ their spiritual successor, the Starstreak High Velocity Missile, or HVM. This is Britain's domestically produced man-portable air defense weapon, and fellow oldies will remember picking this up at the Sea Flag in Siege of Shanghai in Battlefield 4. The HVM comes in vehicle-mounted, tripod-mounted, or man-portable variants, and unlike the legendary Stinger, which is infrared homing, the Starstreak is laser beam guided by the operator. This makes it highly resistant to countermeasures and jamming, and most importantly means it could plausibly target something without a heat signature, such as an undead ice dragon. This laser homing grid does require the operator to track the target after firing. However, this disadvantage is offset by the Starstreak's insane velocity, firing at over 4,000, yes, 4,000 kilometers per hour, out to a max range of 7,000 meters. The Starstreak will need to receive the Magic Wand treatment, with the triple tungsten rod arrangement on the warhead being replaced with Balerian steel rods. The battalion's organic mortar platoon provides indirect fire support from the L16A2 81mm mortar, while the L19A1 white phosphorus round is primarily used for battlefield obscuration and creating a smokescreen. The white phosphorus ignites on contact with air after impact, causing a secondary incendiary effect useful against the flammable undead. The 81mm is effective out to 5,000 meters. The ever-popular Carl Gustav 84mm anti-tank weapon has featured in almost every video thus far, a testament to its global popularity. Like other Commonwealth countries, the Brits were early adopters of the Charlie Gutsake back in the 60s. However, their loyalty wavered in the 90s, when it was phased out in favour of the disposable Law 80. As of 2023, however, the MOD came crawling back to Saab Bofors hat in hand and announced the readoption of the M4 variant. For this battle, the 84mm ASM 509 Reed thermobaric round will be issued, which has an effective range of 300 meters. Fire support comes from the 19th Artillery Regiment, and you'll remember I said that these guys are not strictly from Yorkshire, but this is because they are the only artillery unit in all of England equipped with the Archer self-propelled gun. This is a Swedish platform serving as an interim solution until the British Army receives their RCH-155 Boxer-based guns. There are 6 Archers per battery, and like mortars, the Archer will be fed white phosphorus rounds and has an effective range of over 30 kilometers. The attached cavalrymen from the Royal Lancers normally focus on mounted reconnaissance, but will be trading in their Ajax IFVs for the Churchill Crocodile. The Crocodile was a flame-dispensing tank developed during World War II, and being long retired will have to be reactivated from museums and private collections around the UK. The Crocodile carries the flamer fuel in a heavily armoured trailer, which stores 1,800 litres of fuel, or enough for 80 one-second squirts, out to an effective range of 110 metres. Aside from the flame projector, the Crocodile retains its 75mm main gun and coaxial machine gun. The show gets 2 dragons, so our squaddies get 2 gunships, specifically 2 Apaches from the 3rd Regiment Army Air Corps, attached for close air support. The AH-64 needs no introduction as one of the globe's most iconic attack helicopters, and can fire a multitude of weapons including the 30mm cannon, anti-air missiles, and rocket pods. Most relevant to us is the Hellfire missile, which comes in, of course, a thermobaric variant with a maximum range of 8 kilometers. The attached squadron of engineers are specialists in both offensive and defensive demolitions. This lets them in place booby traps and command-detonated incendiary weapons such as fugas, essentially a buried explosive mortar made to spray burning fuel in a focused direction. Aside from explosives, a key focus of combat engineers is erecting or digging obstacles to hinder an enemy's advance. This is done using standard earth-moving equipment such as bulldozers and excavators, or with tactical platforms like the Trojan Armored Engineering Vehicle. Such equipment allows substantial anti-tank ditches to be dug and improves the effectiveness of a defensive fire plan. Modern night vision and thermal optics enhance detection and identification even in extremely low ambient light. Before you get your knickers in a twist shrieking how the whites are cold, they wouldn't show up on thermals, understand that just because something doesn't produce or radiate heat does not mean it gains predator-esque invisibility under thermal imaging. On the contrary, if the whites are supernaturally cold in contrast to their surroundings, they might actually stand out just as well on thermals as if they were a living target. Like day optics, night vision is less effective in poor conditions or inclement weather. Mission. Realistically, if the mission was only to protect Bran from the approaching Night King, we'd simply load it onto a C-130 and fly it straight to Diego Garcia or Volantis for safekeeping. So instead, our focus will shift to killing the Night King while safeguarding the terrain of Winterfell. Battle Group Kingslayer is to destroy Objective Iceman no later than H+12 hours in order to deny the Undead army access to Fob Winterfell and protect Project Bran. Center of gravity. Unsurprisingly, the modern weapon systems brought to bear by the squaddies is the center of gravity for the defenders, providing both area of effect and extended range damage far beyond what a medieval army could ever achieve. Critical capabilities. Modern incendiary weapons and explosives are devastating area weapons able to inflict mass casualties onto tightly packed attackers. Counter-mobility plans integrate obstacles with direct and indirect fire. Earth-moving equipment can efficiently dig trenches and ditches far deeper and faster than by hand tools alone. Armored vehicles provide a platform in which troops remain protected from dismounted attacks. In this case, buttoned-up tanks would be largely impenetrable by the melee-equipped whites. Offensive fire support in the form of mortars, artillery, and attack helicopters allow defenders to target the enemy at long range. Layering fires in this way means an attacking force can be attrited before reaching the forward defensive lines. Night vision, thermal optics, surveillance UAVs, ground and air radars mean a modern force can remain effective by day and night, able to both detect and accurately engage enemy forces with all weapon systems. Critical vulnerabilities. Predictably, the biggest issue facing a defending force is sufficient ammunition. If munitions are not stockpiled prior to the battle commencing, movement corridors to the rear must be kept open to allow resupply throughout a protracted siege or defensive campaign. While modern armies have close quarters fighting programs and bayonet drills, it makes up a small part of any training regime. As such, when facing a swarm adversary specialized in melee combat, the squaddies are at a disadvantage in both skill, experience, and numbers. With the weapons being primarily close-range flame and long-range artillery, this leaves a firepower gap in the medium ground. This would normally be covered by direct fire weapons such as medium and heavy machine guns, but their ineffectiveness against the undead makes such a layered fire plan ineffectual. As Dragonfire is, well, magic, and the rules say it's capable of melting pretty much everything. As such, even the mightiest of modern steel, even that found in tanks, would presumably be just as vulnerable. The resurrection magic of the Night King means that friendly killed in action can be reanimated into the army of the dead. A second-order problem is that these personnel may be within friendly lines at the time of their turning, meaning any friendly dead will need to be hastily and unceremoniously incinerated to prevent them running amok within Winterfell proper. Part 3. Terrain Analysis. Define the broader area of operations. Winterfell is located within the region of the North, the largest of the 7 kingdoms on the continent of Westeros. Being geographically central makes it well suited as the de facto regional capital, a place the various other houses and rulers can more easily come together. The North is bordered to the east by the Shivering Sea, the Isthmus of the Neck to the south, the Sunset Sea to the west, and the Wall to the north. The Wall is a colossal enchanted structure constructed thousands of years prior to the Battle of Winterfell and runs the width of the continent. This was previously what had kept the army of the undead at bay, but courtesy of acquiring the aforementioned dragon, the Night King was able to breach this boundary and commence his march south. Closer in, Winterfell sits at the eastern edge of the immense Wolfswood Forest, with the bulk of the local population residing in Wintertown, which lies downhill from the fort to the southeast. To give a sense of scale, Winterfell is located approximately 1,000 kilometers from Castle Black at the Wall and around 2,300 kilometers as the Nazgul flies from King's Landing, the capital city of Westeros. For context, that's a similar linear distance as Melbourne to Cairns, Miami to Minneapolis, or Athens to Stockholm. Impact of terrain and weather. The extreme natural climate and the conjured blizzards impacts human performance and equipment alike. Visibility by both eyesight and senses is reduced, and heavy snow hinders mobility by foot and vehicle. Freezing temperatures impacts the reliability of mechanical weapons and electronic systems, and saps strength and endurance from the human body. This cold also impacts the ground, making digging with hand tools particularly arduous, and slower than in more permissive climates. High winds prove equally troublesome, posing high risk to UAS or aviation operations, and reduces the situational awareness of defenders. Observation. Winterfell is situated on a low rolling hill that opens onto flat, sparsely vegetated fields. This terrain and lack of vegetation provides excellent observation out to over 2 kilometers in all directions, allowing unhindered direct fire weapons effect. Cover and concealment. The fortress itself is the main source of cover for defenders, consisting of an 80-foot high stone outer wall topped with towers and crenellations. Attacking forces approaching from the north are afforded next to no protection in the open fields, and no concealed positions in which to site assembly areas. The internal walls and isolated courtyards also provide suitable fallback positions, offering covered movement within the castle itself. The Godswood Annex is a forested sanctuary on the easternmost side of the castle, most used as a place of worship and meditation. The dense vegetation offers good concealment for anyone occupying this part of the fortress. Obstacles. The Wolfswood to the northwest is the primary obstacle to advancing adversaries. This thick forest requires armies to approach through the open terrain to the north and are funneled into the open killing fields in proximity of the fortress. Key terrain. Winterfell itself is the decisive terrain for the AO. Defenders who retain control of the castle are afforded a marked advantage in controlling the surrounding terrain, and any attackers wishing to occupy the region must seize the castle in order to have sanctuary to further deploy forces. Avenues of approach. Winterfell sits smack bang on the King's Road. This road travels from King's Landing in the south all the way to Castle Black in the north, and the road runs through the southern gate of Winterfell and exits the northern gate. Part 4. Battle Plan. As we're preparing for a defensive battle, the ever-faithful engagement area development template will provide the skeleton for our plan. And as a shameless plug to some of my own kits, you can find a simplified one-page version of this available as a free download on the website. There's also other stuff like the handy little rifleman's pocket guide. This one will cost you real human money, but it's a nifty way for you to support the channel and get yourself a little e-book if that tickles your fancy. Identify likely enemy avenues of approach. Armies approaching from the north are most likely to utilise the King's Road on their move south, which offers the path of least resistance, naturally following the more easily traversable terrain of the northern countryside. Approaching Winterfell, armies are channeled due to the natural terrain, the Wolfswood Forest to the west and another forestry belt to the east. Wintertown, the creatively named local village, has its flank protected by the White Knife River further to the east, making the northern direct route the most likely approach, with the western flank through the Wolfswood as the secondary but less likely avenue of approach. Unless, of course, the Night King has been reading up on his 1940s German maneuver warfare. Determine the enemy scheme of maneuver. Based on the show, here's what we can ascertain about the enemy's tactics. The White Walker generals arrive first and establish an assembly area to the rear, with the Night King controlling the battle space from the air on the Undead Dragon. On H-hour, swarms of Whites charge the open ground, moving at high speed to close distance to the fortress. On hitting any obstacle belts, they attempt to crush through by force, and closing to the fortress, they use the timeless zombie strategy of creating a pile to scale walls, and simultaneously employ undead giants to mechanically breach gates. Once a break-in is achieved, the swarm concentrates its force onto the breach point, and floods the area with Whites. The Undead Dragon and Night King are held in reserve as long as possible, only being employed for close air support in support of the breach, or to destroy high-value targets. Determine where to kill the enemy. Battle position Winterfell will need control measures that focus the defensive fire to complementary and most lethal effect. Targeted Area of Interest, or TAI Targaryen, is sited to service the far ground, where the natural terrain is most funneling, and closer in, Engagement Area Stark will cover the close fight on approach to the fortress, and service the man-made obstacle belt. Plan and integrate obstacles. The next step involves constructing tactical obstacles within the engagement area. I've touched on this before in past videos, but I'll deep dive it a bit more for this one. Broadly speaking, obstacles are placed to enhance the defensive fire plan while also disadvantaging the attack force. Far from just slapping wire randomly over the battlefield, one should construct obstacles to achieve a specific effect, these being disrupt, fix, turn, and block. Each effect type has a differing purpose and a corresponding amount of resource tax for defenders and breaching effort for attackers. For example, obstacles assigned a disrupt effect are designed to break up the enemy formation and interrupt the tempo of their advance. They require minimal resources to construct and therefore demand the least breaching effort from attackers. In contrast, a block effect is intended to outright halt an enemy's advance. Blocking obstacles are complex and require considerable resources in construction in order to make any breaching efforts by the attackers untenable. Because of this, disrupt obstacles are usually placed on the edge or outside of the engagement area to not dissuade the enemy from committing to that approach. Conversely, block obstacles are sited on the near side of the engagement area and combined with an intense fire plan to inflict maximum attrition and, if done correctly, destroy the enemy in place. With that in mind, our first obstacle line is an excavated dug slit trench. This does not have to be colossal, but deep and wide enough to disrupt the formation and speed of the White Zerg rush. The trench will be filled with a row of concertina wire to enhance the sticky effect. The second line is another slit trench assigned with a fix effect. Like the first row, this will be filled with wire and anchored with murder rows of concertina wire. These enhance the fix effect and funnel the whites who clamber through into multiple concentrated lanes. Resource dependent, this should be rows of Cat 1 concertina wire or more rudimentary wire fences if stores are getting tight. Next is a tank ditch filled with wood, oil, gasoline, and other incendiaries. To adequately achieve a block effect, tank ditches must be deep and wide enough to stop well tanks, or in our case, to adequately trap a mass of screeching zombies. In the show, lighting such a trench with flaming arrows was shown to be difficult due to the extreme cold, so the squaddies will need a redundancy plan, the primary being remote ignition using demolitions, and secondary method being incendiary grenades. Although a true blocking obstacle should functionally stop the enemy advance, I anticipate this tank ditch will only bring a temporary halt to the White Stampede. The final row is a cluster of timber check hedgehogs. You probably recognize the iron version of these guys from Saving Private Ryan, but the wooden variation is actually used to good effect in the show, particularly when embedded with dragon glass shards, and by scattering them against the fortress walls and the immediate approaching ground, they provide another disrupt obstacle layer. And place weapon systems. Having placed our obstacles, let's integrate our units and weapons into the plan. Working from outside in, first are the Churchill Crocodile flame tanks, crewed by the Royal Lancers. 10 of these will be positioned to target the outer obstacle. 2 more will provide flank security to the inner row, and the remainder as rear security and reserve. Next is Alpha Company from the 1 Yorks, manning the Akpak flamethrowers, targeting the center trench. Anyone not humping a flamethrower will be rocking a Benelli with Dragon's Breath, targeting white penetrators and protecting the vulnerable flame. The few gaps in the tank ditch will be covered with improvised explosive Fugas designed to cover troops withdrawing through the lanes. Bravo Company are returning to their red coat roots and holding the line with bayonets fixed rear of the dragon glass hedgehogs. Like the Unsullied in the show, Bravo Company is the final line of defenders outside the walls, protecting the withdrawal of forward elements. Joining them are sappers from the 32nd Engineer Regiment, also with dragon glass bayonets fixed, and Benelli shotguns, tasked with assisting in obstacle upkeep and repairs. The remainder of the squadron will be positioned in key locations within the fortress, standing by to counter enemy breaches and bolster the gates or other vulnerable entry points. Charlie Company take the place of ancient archers, lining the battlements of Winterfell. Unlike their bowman predecessors, they'll be armed with crates upon crates of incendiary, thermite, and thermobaric grenades. 3rd Platoon from Charlie Company will be held as Battle Group Reserve, centrally located to react as needed. One of Charlie Company's essential tasks is to burn the bodies within the crypt, bringing a tear to the ghost of Ned Stark, but ensuring the castle can't get overrun from within by reanimated corpses. Next comes Support Company with their GPMGs, placed to cover the gaps in the tank ditch and approach to the main gate. While the 7.62 rounds are more likely to chop the whites into crawlers than kill them, it's better than a kick in the tits and at the very least slows them down. Next are the anti-armoured teams equipped with the Carl Gustav 84mm. Like the machine guns, their primary target are the choke points in the anti-tank ditch. Mortar Platoon can bed in their base plates in the Serenity of the Godswood, loaded up with 81mm white phosphorus bombs. The leftovers of Support Company will man the towers and high points of the castle, forming anti-air teams equipped with the Starstreak HVM manpad. The final elements of Battle Group Kingslayer is the artillery battery from the 19th Artillery Regiment, and 2 Apache gunships from the 3rd Regiment Army Air Corps, both smartly located well behind the front, in their gun line and FARP respectively. Plan and integrate indirect fires. Once the enemy are detected in TAI Targaryen, long-range weapons can begin destroying them at range. To achieve this, the approach will be split into free fire areas snow and ice, to allow the artillery and mortars to get to work freely. Closer in, Killbox Frost is the the last control measure before EA Stark and the close-in battle. Free fire areas are pretty much as they sound, a designated zone that has been guaranteed vacant of friendly forces that can be near indiscriminately targeted, whereas a kill box requires more coordination and typically involves targeting from both air and ground fire. Within EA Stark, artillery target Hound is placed to destroy whites on approach to the obstacles. Closer in, mortar targets Wolf and Dog are sighted onto the trenches, while mortar targets Bear, Lion, Dragon, Stag, and Fish are positioned on the flanks and key gaps to provide protective or cut-off fires. The final indirect fire target is the final protective fire or FPF target for both the 155mm artillery and 81mm mortars respectively. Finally, a close air support lane is tentatively sighted right up against the fortress, indicating the position of attack helicopter runs. This obstacle and weapon plan maximizes the strengths of the defenders while minimizing the strengths of the whites. Every obstacle row is either covered by or supplemented with literal fire, the greatest vulnerability of the enemy, while also negating their mass and speed, one of their greatest strengths. Part 5. The Battle Simulation. The undead army marches steadily south, their goal, destroy mankind and usher in an endless winter. Approaching Winterfell from the north, they are detected upon entering Tei Targaryen. Using their range advantage, the Archer SPGs fire the opening salvos of the battle, blanketing free fire area snow with artillery fire. The 155mm rounds spit burning tendrils of white phosphorus in all directions, setting the whites ablaze by the dozen. The whites stampede through both free fire area snow and then free fire area ice, taking heavy casualties from incendiary bombardment. Closer to the fortress, they enter Killbox Frost, and the Apache attack helicopters join the battle. The gunships approach from the flanks, hovering above the battlefield and launching thermobaric hellfire missiles into the undead. The missiles streak into the horde, the intense heat and overpressure vaporizing the tightly packed whites by the dozen. The Apache's 30mm cannon thumps away in the darkness, chopping whites into crawlers throughout the formation. Circling high above the cloud cover on Viserion, the Night King observes the gunships with detached curiosity, before lazily raising his hand and summoning a terrible blizzard from the north. Howling wind and streaking snowfall races towards Winterfell, and the gunships are forced to withdraw from the battle space. With the steel dragons no longer a threat, the Night King surges his army onwards. Closer to Winterfell, the defenders are arranged in their battle positions, the cavalry manning their Churchill flame tanks on the outer line, followed by a company of flamethrower infantry, bayonet infantry and sappers, and the remaining grenadiers, machine gunners, and anti-air troops within the fortress manning the battlements. The whites approach the outer obstacle line, and the defenders adjust their fire to artillery target Hound. The heavy white phosphorus screen acts like a shield, sticking to and incinerating any whites who come in contact with the white-hot smoke screen. But with no fear for their well-being, the whites plough through the barrage and charge straight into the outer obstacle trench. While only momentarily slowing their advance, the ditch breaks up the uniform frontage of their charge, and as they shove and shriek tearing through the ditch, they sacrifice their own to clog the trench and trample over the bodies caught in the wire. Seeing the whites crushing against the ditch, the Churchill crocodiles get to work, spraying a jet of liquefied fuel into the undead. The flame tanks incinerate the front ranks of the attackers and hose the length of the trench line, scorching whites caught in the wire and those leaping over the top. The tankers supplement their primary flame weapon with machine gun fire, chopping the sprinting whites into pieces, taking the legs out from beneath them. The tankers fire until their primary is running on fumes, and as they run their fuel tanks dry, the trickle of whites becomes a flow, and the tankers commence their withdrawal through the east and west flanks. Despite being buttoned up and protected by their armoured hull, some of the tanks become swarmed with whites before pulling away, and radioing for assistance from their peers, begin scratching each other's backs, machine gunning their own vehicles to chop the clambering whites into gibs. With the tanks clear of the outer obstacle, Mortar Platoon commenced their fire plan on mortar target Wolf, dropping 81mm white phosphorus onto the trench line to cover the withdrawal of the tanks. Arriving back at the fortress, the tanks take up blocking positions to the rear, postured to machine gun any stray whites slipping around the flank, as the whites surge towards the second obstacle line. Like the first trench, the sprinting advance becomes bogged down by the ditch and wire, and the tsunami of undead becomes a trickle as they are packed into the murder rows. The Alpha Company flame men hose the wire lanes with their AK packs, crisping the whites as they approach the line. Shotgunners protect the flame troopers, applying more diligent fire onto lone whites sprinting towards the defenders. As the whites bleed towards the edge of the obstacle, the two remaining crocodiles engage with their heavy flamer, protecting the flanks of the dismounts. Although inflicting heavy casualties, the Alpha Company flamethrowers are rapidly depleting their tanks mere minutes into the engagement, and as they go bingo on fuel, they ditch their AK packs and begin a sequenced withdrawal through the gaps in the tank ditch. Despite their coordinated efforts, not all the flamethrowers run dry at the same time, and the whites quickly spring on the troopers caught lagging behind as the company weaves through the hedgehogs towards the rear lines. Noting the path of the retreating Alpha Company, the undead surge toward the breaks in the final obstacle, The time is right for the demolition's booby traps, and the combat engineers detonate their food gas explosives. An ear-shattering blast tears through the cold night, 3 jets of jellied napalm spray into the undead, instantly crisping the whites caught in the fire lanes. Joining the chaos, the support company machine guns begin their fire plan, spraying GPMGs into the channels, chopping and dismembering the sprinting whites into gnashing, crawling monstrosities. On the parapets, the Carl Gustav gunners play their part, lobbing 84mm rounds into the middle ground, targeting the lumbering giants, and vaporizing the tightly packed undead in the choke points, as the last of the Alpha Company flame units move past the Bravo Company line and re-enter the castle. With the brakes and the obstacle being smashed by direct fire, the whites begin hurling themselves into the ditch, clawing their way through the timber and fuel to press forwards towards the castle. Now at the forward edge of the defensive line, Bravo Company bayonetters and the sappers trigger their remote charges, igniting the fuel and wood in a blaze that illuminates the battlefield. Caught in the tank ditch, hundreds of whites are instantly scorched by the inferno. The few whites already past the obstacle continue their sprint towards the castle walls, screeching and weaving through the dragon glass hedgehogs until they crash against the bayonets of Bravo Company. Arriving piecemeal at the defensive line, the whites are felled by obsidian bayonets as the squaddies stab and slash the decaying reanimated corpses. With the bulk of the undead temporarily halted against the tank ditch, the defenders call on their offensive support to inflict maximum casualties. Enacting their fire plan, they trigger the 155mm FPF and mortar target dog. Artillery and bombs rain through the night sky, re-killing undead by the dozens with bursting white phosphorus. Swarming to escape the artillery barrage, the whites begin flowing around the edges of the trench, taking the path of least resistance. The mortar fire controllers shift targets and fire on mortar target lion and mortar target dragon, creating a defensive shield of burning hot chemical fire. Watching through the clouds and the blizzard from high above, the Night King sees his attack stalling and realizes his undead dragon must be committed to achieve a tactical break-in. Diving through the thick cloud cover, the winged beast screeches as it belches blue flame down the Bravo Company line. Dozens of troopers are instantly incinerated, soldiers diving for cover in every direction to avoid the strafing run of the undead close air support. Manning the towers of Winterfell, the anti-air operators frantically track the target through their sights before Viserion can disappear into the blizzard once more. The HVM manpads lock and launch, sending the missiles screaming through the night sky. Dead before he knew what hit him, Viserion plummets to the ground, the Night King tumbling through the air before thudding into the ground outside the wire. As the remaining Bravo Company troops come to their senses, the Night King calmly rises to his feet, the howling blizzard coming to an unnatural halt, and facing the fortress, motions forward with outstretched arms, surging his army through the flame. The whites hurl themselves into the ditch by the dozen, building piles of dead that suffocate the flames and create corpse bridges through the ditch. Having sustained tremendous casualties from the dragon fire, the sappers and Bravo Company survivors hurry back inside the northern gate, the awaiting combat engineers inside reinforcing and barricading the doors. With the final obstacle road breached, the undead flood towards the walls of Winterfell. Crushing against the heavy stone, they claw and clamber in writhing piles of leather and bone to escalate the fortress walls. Manning the parapet above, Charlie Company grenadiers commence their grenade shower, spraying white phosphorus, thermite, and thermobarics onto the whites below as fast as they can pull the pins and hurl their bombs. The undead are incinerated in droves, shrieking as the white phosphorus burns through decaying flesh, while the thermobaric overpressure blasts their skeletal form to pieces. But as fast as they fall, their numbers continue to surge forwards, furiously trying to build mounds of bodies against the fortress walls. Seeing the relentless crush of the undead, and with all troops now safely inside the castle walls, the defenders call in their final protective fire mortar mission. Calling the bombs as close to the fortress as possible, mortar platoon fires on rapid rate, sending a steel rain streaking through the night sky. Despite his immense casualties, the Night King calmly surveys the battle, whites screaming past him on all sides. Unfazed by the surrounding firestorm, he gazes up towards the defenders as bullets sponge into his body and mortars and incendiaries explode harmlessly around him. He stares towards the modern troops with dispassionate indifference, noting their weapons with the composure of an immortal being who has outlived kingdoms and bloodlines. Time is very much on his side. With the undead completely compressed into the kill zone, the defenders open fire with everything they have. Machine guns chop the undead to pieces. Mortars bombard the middle ground. Heavy artillery rains white phosphorus in depth. Thermobaric Carl Gustav rounds vaporize those near the trench, and grenades incinerate corpses by the dozen. With their devastating incendiary firepower, the legions of whites are no match for the modern defenders, and the army of the undead is annihilated to the last. The guns fall silent, and a toxic smokescreen drifts lazily across the battlefield. The squaddies peer into the darkness, straining their stinging eyes through night vision. As the phosphorus screen dissipates, 13 silhouettes materialize through the gloom. The Night King, surrounded by his generals, wholly unscathed by the bombardment that just wiped out his legions. With a smirk of disdain, the Night King raises his arms once more, and the previously fallen troopers from Alpha and Bravo Company rise grotesquely to their feet. Now in the servitude of the Night King's undead army, they stare lifelessly towards Winterfell with glowing blue eyes. With their incendiary weapons ineffective against this supernatural commander, Battle Group Kingslayer prepares for its all-or-nothing final gambit. Regrouping in the courtyard behind the northern gate, all the remaining infantry steel themselves to the fight of their lives, and the order to fix bayonets booms down the line. Their dragonglass blades glimmer in the moonlight, as those who had not already done so fit bayonets to the muzzles of their SA-80s. The sappers remove the reinforcement barricades and heave open the heavy wooden doors. Leading the pack, one of the sappers bulldozes the pile of corpses from the main gate, clearing the way for the infantry. The infantry stream from the fortress, sprinting towards the enemy with rifles at the ready. With a glance from the Night King, the newly resurrected Whites charge, as the two factions collide in a terrible clash of steel and bone. The bayonets of the living clash against the bayonets of the dead. The troopers thrust into the nightmare of having to fight their now zombified fallen comrades in close combat. Seeing the British soldiers up close for the first time, the Night King watches these novel-looking warriors with curiosity, a feeling he's not experienced for hundreds of years. The infantry thrust and slash, screaming as they sink dragon glass muzzle deep into the chest of their enemy. Although ferocious, the Whites are handily outnumbered, and after a brief but violent skirmish, the squaddies emerge victorious. The Night King feels the twinge of curiosity shift to another long-forgotten emotion, annoyance. Tilting his head in a predatory manner, he draws his ice blade from his back, his White Walkers following suit in perfect synchronization. The living infantry form up in their ranks, level their bayonets, and charge once more at the enemy. The undead generals don't so much as flinch as the squaddies bear down on their position, running line abreast, howling battle cries as they advance across the corpse-riddled ground. The British troopers lock gazes with the unblinking blue eyes of the ice demons, and crash headfirst into the formation of undead. But with centuries of experience, the White Walkers are formidable swordsmen, and they block the lunging heavy attacks with ease, plunging frozen spears into living flesh. The infantry crush forward into the chaos, as those ahead of them fall to the White Walkers. With the guns and mortars silent, the dominant sound of the battlefield is the furious battle cries of the living defenders, and the clash of obsidian and ice. The rifle-mounted bayonets are clumsy weapons compared to the elegant ice blades of the others, but through sheer aggression and strength of numbers, the squaddies begin to gain the upper hand, concentrating their strikes to overwhelm even these most adept of ancient swordsmen. One by one, the White Walkers explode into shards of ice as the dragonglass blades finds their mark, and as the last White Walker falls to the infantry swarm, the modern troops find themselves face to face with the Night King. Standing tall, crystal blade held calmly at his side, he runs his gaze lazily along the line of strangely clothed warriors. Panting with exhaustion, the troopers are presented a nightmare spectacle, an undead ice demon, backlit against the dancing flames of the trench, impossibly blue eyes piercing the darkness. Returning his stare, they find no malice, nor kinship, simply apathy, an ageless being of 1,000 lifetimes, his ambitions beyond the comprehension of mortal men. The infantry charge once more, headlong with rifles leveled towards the most powerful foe on the battlefield. Unflinching until the last moment, the Night King lunges impossibly fast, brushing aside a line of bayonets in a single blow, crystalline ice raking against obsidian blades. Weaving and slashing in a blur, the inhuman speed of the Night King outclasses the laboured attacks of the infantry. Catching one of the soldiers by the throat, he hurls the hapless squaddie backwards into the throng, simultaneously weaving past incoming strikes and slicing clean through another rifleman with his sword hand. In waves the infantry attack, and in waves they fall to the ice sword. Changing tact, they begin enveloping his position, attempting to flank blind spots. Incoming with an overhead thrust, another trooper receives an effortless backhand strike, cracking jawbone and crumpling his body into the snow. Attacking from behind, a charging rifleman attempts to sink his bayonet into the demon's back, but the thrust is thwarted as the Night King whips around in a whirl, crystal sword momentarily clanging against, then disintegrating the rifle barrel as it freezes the gunmetal. Seeing their numbers fading, one of the infantry leaders realizes something must be done. A stout, dyed-in-the-wool Yorkshireman, Corporal Sean Stark rallies his section with a cry, and rushes headfirst into the crucible, screaming while slashing his bayonet from above. The Night King swats the rifle aside with one hand, and sinks his sword hilt deep into Corporal Stark's chest, piercing through Kevlar and plate armor with ease. As the rest of the section lunge forwards, the Night King attempts to withdraw his sword to parry, but Corporal Stark clutches his vice grip on the demon's wrists, denying his blade freedom. The Night King's eyes briefly widen, as Corporal Stark sputters through a blood-soaked mouth.
Finish that bastard.
The remaining riflemen ram their bayonets into the Night King's side, striking the gaps in his leather armor, the once almighty demigod instantly shattering into a cascade of ice. As the dawn light of a new day glows in the distance, the riflemen tend to their wounded and collect the fallen. With the Night King defeated, the existential threat to the realm of man is no more, and the lands of Westeros and Yorkshire usher in a new age of prosperity. As always, thank you for the gift of your time.